Welcome to another episode of Policy Square. Today we'll be spending some time in discussing one of the biggest issues and challenges of our times, climate change. Climate change's effects are global in scope and unparalleled in scale, ranging from altering weather patterns, threatening food production world over, rise in sea levels that is increasing the risk of catastrophic flooding, and warmer temperatures that is questioning the mere existence of some living beings across the world. Like all other countries, India also has a very crucial role to play in combating climate change. And this role, our country not just realizes but also has been at the forefront of taking actions in the area. India has emerged as one of the fastest growing generators of renewable energy in the world. And not just this, there are a series of pledges which the country has taken at COP26, ultimately leading up to its commitment of becoming a net zero state by 2070. To discuss this and also understand India's level of preparedness, today we have amongst us Mr. C.K. Mishra. Mr. Mishra is a former Secretary of Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Being a former secretary of the nodal Ministry of Climate Change, Mr. Mishra has also led Indian negotiations at several international forums, including those held at UNFCCC and Montreal Protocol. Currently, Mr. C.K. Mishra is heading an expert committee on sustainable finance in India. Sir, thank you. Firstly, thank you very much for taking our time and meeting with us. All of us have been very keen to know your point of view on a lot of burning topics pertaining to climate change. To start with, sir, because we've just gotten done with COP26, India has made very bold and ambitious targets and has set these targets for herself. If you were to gauge, sir, do you think our capacities are in place to achieve this in a time-bound manner?
See, first and foremost, yes, they are very bold announcements, and even when we made the NDCs in 2015 at Paris, even at that point we had been pretty bold. This is even better. Now, how do you do it? The process has been going on since 2015, ever since we made the commitments at Paris, and hopefully we have covered a lot of ground. But actually translating it into action in terms of finance and technology for it to be done on the ground means a huge amount of resource. Some of the resource has already flown, some will come in from different quarters, but at the end of the day I think we will have to work out a work plan where we measure the financial support that we are giving to the sector to live up to those expectations. And it's not just finance. If we really have to leapfrog from where we are, we will need finance, of course, and we'll need a lot of technology. Now, technology can be done two ways. A is you innovate. In-house innovations bring up new technologies, or there's a global technology transfer. To be very honest, I don't see much of the latter happening. So there has to be a lot of emphasis on innovation and a lot of emphasis and focus on sectors where we want this to happen. If we do it across the board, the results may not be very sharp. But if we are focused on sectors which we know are emitting more, and the ones we know are easily doable, I think we will be able to achieve these targets, and I think India is well on its way to achieving it.
That's good to know, sir. So when we talk about climate action, we feel we still talk in terms of totality, whereas it's a sum total of the efforts taken by all of the stakeholders, whether it's the public or the private sector or even the individual citizens. However, we have seen the conversation to be limited to the international forums or even at the national level. So what efforts the government of India is taking or should be taken to cascade these goals that have been made under Panchamrit to the various stakeholders that need to make it happen?
See, you've put it very correctly. I'll put it slightly differently. issues like climate change cannot and should not be the government's responsibility alone. And unless this concept is well understood by government, the industry, the business and the people at large, you will not get success. You may have some improvement, but not the desired result. Now the issue is, how do you make that happen? What can the government do? The government can provide an enabling environment where green technologies, green activities increase and make things better. Government can finance certain things, announce plans, announce schemes, announce incentives. But at the end of the day, even with all this, you will fall short of expectation. Unless the private sector, the industry and business pitches in very heavily. And to make matters easy, people start realizing that they too have a role and a responsibility in this. See, we talk about emission. That is a critical thing. Let us pause for a moment and think slightly differently. What if every individual started contributing towards ensuring measures which do not add to emission and instead, let us say, adds to carbon sink? So you are offsetting. So that is the kind of environment you will have to create, and I guess there can't be a diktat to it. It will have to be communication, and it will have to be a lot of knowledge sharing with people. I think that one of the biggest problem in the country that we have today is awareness of the reality of climate change. I mean, of course, at one point of time you had even big countries saying there is nothing called climate change. Fortunately, that has changed now, but in the Indian context, it is very critical. And mind you, here is a country which traditionally has been ingrained in that. Climate issues are traditionally our core issues. So we need to go back to that. And for that, I think one of the major roles that government would have is to create a communication strategy which can reach people.
So on that communication strategy, and in fact, what we also were thinking as to how do we engage the citizens, because they are aware of the climate implications on their livelihoods and quality of life, but they may not necessarily know what their own individual roles will be. I assume the communication strategies will help, but beyond that, do you think there are any specific efforts that citizens could take, or maybe in partnership with the industry, to be a part of the solution?
You know, one of the things that we can think of, and this is often a thought that's coming to my mind, is to create climate platforms where government, industry and people come together. And let the learnings from that platform be the message to be communicated. Second, as a country, we must recognize, honor and reward even small efforts towards mitigation of climate change. There are n number of people doing good work. You and I don't know. So let us create a mechanism, an institutional mechanism where we are able to spread this message. See, it's not as if it's a completely new technology or science that people in their daily lives. I'll give you one example. You keep talking about, sustainable production. How about sustainable consumption? And that is where you need every individual to come in. What is he consuming that is adding to the climate disaster? He may not know. So I have to provide as government that scientific base for him to know that if your consumption pattern changes from X to Y, you are actually helping reduce X amount of carbon. That is the strategy that may work.
I have a question, so that the last 2 years and now the third one beginning has seen the onslaught of COVID, as we know. And due to that, a lot of businesses, especially the smaller businesses and MSMEs, which form a key part of the Indian economy, have suffered greatly. So given this fact, how economically viable is it for companies right now to think about something like sustainability, given that they are just struggling to survive?
See, on a merely financial front, one could just simply say that this is not the time, because they are very badly off financially and they don't have the resources to do it. But if you look at it deeply, if you don't do it now, you are likely to miss it altogether. Because currently your per capita emission is low, your total country's emission is low, you are on a growth path. If you take corrective measures right now, that will be cost effective as well as timely. So I think we need to take these MSMEs out of the current financial difficulty that they have, even if it means incentives which are fiscal. I would even recommend non-fiscal incentives, which makes their life easier. You know, many a times, many industries do certain things also because of recognition by us that be. We need to look at it very critically. One of the problems that we face is that we are extremely supply driven. We need to look at the demand side very carefully. And I think the solution lies in the demand and not in the supply. And that is why the chain of MSMEs, although there is a change, there is a definite pattern, but not across the board. What is today being quoted as non-affordable may actually become affordable if you really sit and talk about technologies and methodologies which are newer. So give that, as if I may say, GAN to them, help them do that.
So for the SMEs, the fiscal incentive that you talk about, one of the thought is that an institutional mechanism to take these fiscal incentives to them may be not as robust as we would want, given the large spread of these SMEs across the nation and how important they are. What's your team working on in terms of creating that kind of a mechanism, or your thoughts on it?
See, SMEs in Indian economy will continue to play the most vital role. And if you do a breakdown of the emission also, they are very, very critical. Now, I think many schemes Government of India has floated. You have this credit link subsidy scheme, you have the zero effect, zero defect, and things like that. Now, these schemes are impacting part of the industry, because the rest of the industry is actually struggling with the daily costs. So, what we really need to do is reach out in a different way. And it will have to be not just government incentivization, but a financial instrument creation which will help them access finance at a cheaper and affordable rate. The access to finance is rigid right now. You need to make it more liberal as far as SMEs are concerned, irrespective of the fact whether many of them are doing well due to COVID or not so well due to COVID. You need them all. So, why can't we create a market, so to say, where they are able to participate on their own terms in accessing finance? I think that is something that we should think about.
So, because we are talking about climate finance, an important thing that I want to get to your notice is that there are two major trends which have emerged in the domain of climate finance. One is that a large section of climate finance is going towards climate mitigation initiatives, and a very small part of it is coming to climate adaptation initiatives, which for an adaptation for a country like ours is more critical. Why do you think this is the trend, and what is it that can be done at this stage to get more funds to adaptation activities also?
See, the global discourse, whether from Kyoto right up to Glasgow, is focused on mitigation. And one of the reasons I feel they are focused on mitigation is that mitigation gives you immediate results. So it's visible. Secondly, the finances you put into mitigation have an element of profit. Therefore, the private sector is more prone to going towards mitigation. And there is also a feeling across the world, wrongly so, that if you are able to reduce emission, you will be able to stop the ill effects of climate change. But what you are not looking at is the impact climate change is having on lives, and that is where adaptation comes in. According to me, adaptation is a central part, and particularly for countries like India, very, very critical, where you have small farmers, small holdings, etc. We can't compromise on that. But how do you do? What finances do you create? We created an adaptation fund among the first in the world to do that. India was, but we haven't succeeded. And the global attention to adaptation is lip service. In fact, Glasgow had a discussion on this, but could not come up with something very concrete in terms of incentivizing adaptation. There are certain impacts of climate change which you cannot do away with. So the only option is that you learn to weather it, learn to, resist it. You have a system of adaptation. Unless we are able to do that, I think it's not going to be a big success. Green Climate Fund, for example, GCF.
Yes.
Let's take that example. It says 50-50. Look at the funding. Hugely in favor of mitigation. Even though the charter says 50-50, it's not going towards adaptation. So it's a real issue, and the world needs to recognize that where mitigation is possible, it should be done. Wherever it is not possible, adaptation methodologies will have to come up. Small islands, for example. What is the best way to? They don't have emission. See, they are not emitting. So what are you going to mitigate there? We have to have a strategy where we combine both.
So then another trend that really caught my interest was that the funds that are coming in climate finance particularly are going into renewable energy sector. It's very skewed. But there are other sectors that require funds as well. So if you're talking about sustainable agriculture, you're talking about sustainable infrastructure. But you see that whenever people talk about climate finance, they only refer to renewable energy as a sector.
See, it's a fact that so far whatever investment, green, if we are able to call it, and I have this problem with definition, that's why I keep saying taxonomy for green must be developed. But green finance has come in renewable energy in a big way for two reasons. Easy available technologies were there across the world which could be taken, and this is a segment which is easy to do, because if you are doing hydel, the resources are there. If you are wind, there is a natural resource hanging around there. If you are doing solar, there is a natural resource which is backing you up. Plus, it gives you returns. So, a lot of investment have gone into renewable energy. Whereas, if you of course, our fixation with non-fossil fuels is a correct one, but I feel at times overplayed. Where is the finance for hard to abate segment, for example? What are we doing with steel? What are we doing with cement? These are not going to go away. The production is only going to increase. Investments are not coming in this sector. Infrastructure, transport, investments are not coming into those sectors. The main reason is that we have not been able to establish an economic model of return on investment in these segments, which I think we need to do. And secondly, I think the understanding of the value of these is also just beginning to catch up with people. So maybe in days to come, you will find investments going into this also, because how much of renewable can you do? That has a limitation. So more and more finance must go there, and unless finance starts going to hard to abate segment, overall reduction in emission is not going to take place. I mean, there are countries which are saying that they are using renewables for everything, almost everything. India may not be in a position to say that right now because its dependence on coal will be there. But then, for a country like India, it is even more important that the mitigation aspects of coal be tackled. The investment must go there. You see, there is nothing called a terrible fuel as long as you are able to balance the ill effects of that. It's best to go on clean fuel, and ultimately the world will. Fossil fuels are not here to stay. They will ultimately happen. But till such time that we have them, let's have the best, the cleanest possible.
And then, sir, in the whole ecosystem of climate change, I know you've spoken of the role which private sector can play, but when it particularly comes to climate finance.
Let me give you one example just to illustrate what I am trying to say. The cement sector of India decided that it will move towards net zero. Investments came in, technologies came in, reductions started happening, they changed the method of production, they created a roadmap for themselves. I think the biggest thing that the private sector can do is to make, today everybody is talking about ESG, make that your priority actually. Not just ESG for ESG's sake, but make that your priority and see how you can transit to green technologies. Any transition to green technology, according to me, adds value to the product and will get you a better price. So it is in the interest of the private sector to do it, and in the larger interest of the country and humanity to do it. But private sector will continue to play a major role, because either it is technology or finance or operational issues, not everything can be controlled and dictated by government. But as I said earlier also, government has to be the biggest enabling force, and that I think government is trying to do. It is for the private sector to take advantage of this. And why not? They should also openly say what the challenges are. Let's discuss those challenges. They have challenges, there is no doubt about that. But that does not in any way limit or inhibit their role in changing the climate. They have a huge role to play, not just in India, across the globe. And we must recognize also the fact that their contribution also so far has been great.
Sir, you have been championing India's climate action fight, so thank you for that, and thank you for speaking with us today. Through this podcast today, we would want to take your views to our audience to say how committed the Government of India and India as an entity is for climate action, and also with leaders such as you, we are in good hands. So thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.